Indianapolis 500 or
I
something, right? They
know, right?
screech into the pit and change their tires and off they go.
I know, right? Well, welcome everyone. We're gonna let everybody kind of settle in, so we'll wait a few moments to really get started. I know many of you are coming back, and we're grateful from the last hour.
I'm going to run up and grab a glass of water real quickly because I have a
Good
cold. My throat
idea.
keeps coughing. So
Joseph, I hope you're doing well today.
Doing well. Thanks, Charlene.
Good. Well, we've been having a good time with our Jubilee celebration online, so happy to continue with you next. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so, and we'll start. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and begin with the brief prayer. I know Mark did that for us at the beginning of the first one. It may have held us throughout, but we might have different people on this call. So I'll go ahead and lead us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we come and give all praise and honor to you for all that is good and right in our lives. And we especially ask for your blessings and to send your Spirit to be with us today as we continue to celebrate the Jubilee that Pope Francis designated in this year of hope for persons with disabilities and the deaf community. Those of us who have an area of influence, continue to use us to do your will, to build up your kingdom. And for our families in particular, we ask for special blessings. You know the needs of everyone. So we just ask that you continue to provide the people, whether it's us or others, to meet those needs so that they can live fully in the church as they desire to be, and allow us to support them in ways that we can. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, we are delighted in the second hour of our celebration to have Dr. Joseph White join us. I've been blessed to know Dr. Joseph White for probably decades now because I used to serve in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, and he was in the Diocese of Austin all those years. I think still is. And he's a clinical psychologist, child psychologist, and family psychologist. And he can correct me if I'm wrong in some of these terms. And he's also in lead role for curriculum with our Sunday Visitor, one of our major Catholic publishers. So he wears, two very important hats for us in the church. So, Joseph, we're so happy for you to be with us today to really talk to us more about the family perspective in the church regarding disability.
Thank you, Charlene. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. And if you'd like to say more even already about yourself and your ministry and your clinician hat, please do so now.
Yeah, well, I've stepped back a little bit from active practice in psychology as I've taken on more of a role at OSV. So I formerly had a very active private practice part time and was doing this other work part time. And now I'm full time at OSV for the last few years. But um, the work that I do in curriculum at OSV is focused in many ways on integrating what we know about how kids learn and think and grow, and how to help them grow in faith, and how to support the whole family, which has the first and most important role in forming kids in the faith. So, as part of that work, we also do a lot in terms of making sure that our materials can be utilized well by persons with disabilities. And Charlene, I'm grateful for some of the work that you've done with us to work on adaptations to the materials for children with disabilities, as well as help for catechists in creating an inclusive environment in faith formation.
Thanks, Joseph. And I want to say one other thing. When you talk about, and I'll just say, when we say children of God, we're talking about children of all ages, though sometimes we're talking about school age and resources.
Mm-hmm.
But children of God, truly meaning, all ages across the life cycle, especially when
Absolutely.
it comes to developmental disabilities or other diagnoses.
Right.
And if I can also share that you also personally have in your own family a loved one, very loved one, daughter, who, and you can say more about it, who is experiencing disability, and her growth and development that I'm sure adds to your all your ministries now.
Yeah, we adopted our daughter 4 years ago, and she is autistic. I'm learning, relearning appropriate language because, of course, that changes over time. And my understanding is that in the autism community now, people prefer to be referred to as autistic rather than persons with autism. For the longest time, we were very focused on using person first language, and for good reasons. But of course, in some portions of the disability community, people prefer to be referred to in other ways, and we want to be respectful of that as well. So I have a daughter who's autistic, and she is a great gift to us. Also, autism presents some challenges for her in navigating some important environments in her life as well. So this is certainly an issue that's very personal to me, and that I'm passionate about in new ways now as a parent of an autistic child.
Thank you. Yes, parenthood stretches you to begin with, let alone if you're a parent of a child with a disability. More opportunities to stretch, of course, and learn and grow together. I'm glad I didn't intend to get into a language thing, but I'll just add just briefly, when I first started serving, in an archdiocese and working in ministry full time, you're right, it was very much about person first language. And now, decades later, we know there's person first language, which has a place, especially for me as a minister in the church. It's typically where I live and referring to the disability community or someone with a disability. But we also now, as things evolve, teach identity first language. So we never tell someone how to self-identify, and hence we would call that identity first language. So thanks for bringing that up right away, too.
Well, and if I can share, in conversations with my daughter about this, and my daughter has good verbal skills. That's not typical of every autistic child, and we can probably get into some more detail on how every child is unique in terms of needs for support and gifts that they bring to the community. Every child of God of all ages, right? But for my daughter, we had a conversation about this shift in the language, and this really resonated for her in the same way that it does for many people in the autism community, that autism is a disability that is central for many folks to their identity, because it affects how they perceive the world in almost every environment and how they interact with the world in almost every environment. So there are many individuals who prefer to be called autistic versus a person with autism, precisely for that reason, because they want people to be aware of the fact that this is part of their identity, and part of the way that they interact in multiple settings.
Beautiful. And I often say, many of us wish that there was just another word even for disability. I mean, as much as language evolves, I'm anxious and curious to see what the next word might be, because I think some of us would like to let go of that word too, actually.
Yeah.
Right now, we're still kind of living in that space. Joseph, can you, because of your past career and credentials, whatnot, really start leading us into how can the church best support, again, the whole family? So this holistic lens of care and love of families who truly are beacons of hope for what they do, supporting their loved ones and their pro-life choices and things like this.
Right. Well, one thing I would say is, as is important for almost everything that we do in parish ministry, really getting to know families, really creating a space where open dialogue can happen and where people can bring all of their gifts and also their needs for support and their questions and their challenges, their struggles. That's really key. And I have to say here too, I want to brag on my own parish, St. Austin's Parish in Austin, not named after the city though, named after
Okay,
Augustine
sounds
of
like it.
Canterbury, named after St. Augustine of Canterbury. But the parish that I belong to is very good at listening to families, and we knew that we were in the right place when we adopted our daughter because of that. Because again, every autistic person and every family of a family member with a disability is different. And so listening is key, even if you feel like you know a lot about it. As a child psychologist, I can tell you that I had no idea how much I did not know until I was a parent of a child with a disability. You know, and I, as a psychologist, I was trained quite a bit about autism and other various disabilities. I knew a lot about various accommodations to make and things that could be helpful and characteristics of autistic persons as well as other disabilities. But none of that replaces actually getting to know the individual. And one of the things that I really appreciate about our parish is that nearly every contact that we have had with various people on the ministry staff and people serving in other capacities at the parish, when we've talked about our daughter, it's begun with just them wanting to hear about her and to understand her gifts and also her needs. When we've navigated things like preparation for the sacraments, for example, it hasn't been, okay, here's what we do for autistic children. It has been, tell us about your daughter. And I appreciate that. So I would say, no matter where you are in terms of skills and experience and knowledge with persons with disabilities, the most important thing is to always continue to listen and to dialogue with families.
Thank you. And I really appreciate your honesty in saying, even with this level of credentials, I learned more over here when I had a personal experience, because then it wasn't just head knowledge, it was lived experience now, which is, again, next level, right?
Yes. And, I think part of that was I knew some of the practical challenges that parents of autistic children face. I did not know what it was going to feel like, and that makes a big difference. Just in terms of the presence that people in ministry ideally could have and need to have with families that are navigating this, and I think for us too, in some ways it came all at once because we adopted this child who was 8 years old, who was autistic. But I think that also happens even for children that grow up within a family, although sometimes those things unfold over time, especially with a developmental disability, just kind of understanding what's going on with my child, what do I need to know about him or her, how do I need to advocate. I think one of the things for many of us as parents, because of all of the emotion, all of the feelings that are tied up with wanting to be a good parent for your child and wanting to give your child the things that he or she needs, we also can sometimes enter into new situations with a certain level of defensiveness because we're protective, and I think understanding that, being open, having that posture of walking with versus let me tell you about your child. We've also navigated situations, educational situations, for example, where um, we would come and talk about our child, and they would say, "Well, she doesn't look like she has autism," or "We're surprised to hear that," or you know, and um, like part of me wants to say, "Well, wait until she's frustrated," but
They'll show you.
um, uh, I think understanding that nobody is going to know. I mean, especially when we're talking about children, but really with family members of any age, nobody's going to know this person like their family. And being willing to listen to that and to gather information first is so important. And to gather information not in a clinical way, not with a clipboard saying, okay, tell me about this, tell me about that. To gather information not just in terms of deficit or need, but to get to know the strengths as well. I mean, I appreciate opportunities that my daughter has to just be a kid enjoying something and not to just be accommodated all the time, or to be able to share her gifts and what she's good at, and not just to feel like people are doing us a favor. you know I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important that is. If we really want to fully include people with disabilities, they need to be full and participating members of the community, not people that we work around.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Or in any way, pity.
Right,
It's not like
right.
it's not a less than situation at all.
Empathy is needed, but pity is not.
Correct.
Pity is not helpful. Yeah,
Be open to receive all the gifts because we all have gifts. That's from God. Everybody's
right,
got gifts. They
right.
might come packaged differently. Some are tangible, some are intangible, but absolutely. But I guess speaking of families, I know I hear this a lot from parishes, or I have over the years, and so I'll just bring it up for a quick discussion. The parish will say, leadership, they don't tell us. They don't tell us if on one hand, I used to, and I still say, every registration form, starting with the parish registration form, ought to at least have the question, any accommodations needed. Just a
Right.
very, in my opinion, non-threatening question. For those who have something, they would maybe respond, and that's their choice. If they don't understand the question, it's probably a mute point, and they'll move on. But at least at least even also raising awareness that you are open to making a modification or accommodation on whether it's
Yes.
hearing loss or et cetera, wheelchair access, to inquire. And then if you get a response, obviously it's a personal, just a conversation, like you say, to build a relationship and get to know the needs.
And one thing I might add to that, Charlene, is the reason that we as parents of children with disabilities sometimes feel like
Mm-hmm.
not telling you, is because there are things that you're not telling us in that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I'd recommend, when we're talking about parish forms and stuff like that, before you ask if any accommodations are needed, make a statement about this. Say something like, St. Andrew's Parish is fully committed to including everyone, including, say for example, it's on a religious education registration form, including diverse learners and making reasonable accommodations. So say that first, and then say, or so that we don't feel like we're causing somebody trouble, or that it's going to be viewed as, can we do this or can we not do this. i
Right.
i think what's necessary can be done. Reasonable accommodations can happen. I think very few parents of children with disabilities are going to ask people to absolutely bend over backwards and go out of their way for their child. They just want to know that their child is going to be included, and that people are willing to do something different if it would be helpful.
Again, as we say, belonging is a human need, right? Not a
Right.
special need. So everybody wants to belong, and every family wants their children to have a sense of belonging, especially in the Lord's house. So absolutely. Um, Good points there. I think another thing that I think comes up often with families, or we are aware of, a couple things. Unfortunately, in the church, I often say, putting something in the bulletin might be great, but you might not reach the family there because guess what? It may be already underrepresented in our pews, which is a sad reality. So I guess the other point then is what's the creative outreach to either bring back or connect with families maybe in the boundary of a parish that we're
Yeah.
not currently seeing there.
Well, I think that's a great question. I think if I can step back for a second, one place that we could start though is even just within the Sunday Mass. There are a lot of children with disabilities that are in the Sunday Mass that are not in the religious education program, for example, or families that might at least come to Mass, maybe just at Easter and Christmas, but they're there, but they don't necessarily feel like the rest of the parish activities are accessible to them. One of the things that has been so helpful to us has been the mindset of the parish in terms of openness to people with disabilities. And sometimes that really takes education, and it takes kind of a parish wide effort. And I don't know if, well, I do know at some point that did happen at the parish where we are, but you still see the fruits of that today. Um, because we have come to masses, especially when our daughter first came to us, and hadn't learned yet really how to sit in mass, and didn't always know what was going on, and what was expected and unexpected, in terms of the mass, where we would come in with a lot of anxiety, and we would sit in the pew and worry, am I bothering these people in front of us? Is she distracting the people behind us? Are they going to ask us to move somewhere else? We didn't want to sit in the back with her because we knew that if we sat in the back, she wouldn't even be aware that we were there. Like, I mean, that was sort of her level of attention span at that point. That if we really wanted to help her begin to understand the Mass, and understand that something important was happening, we needed to sit in the front where she could see everything. But we were also nervous about doing that, and it helped so much that there were parishioners around us that, people kind of tend to sit in the same areas, go to the same Mass and sit in the same general area. There were parishioners around us that would turn around and talk to us and get to know us. And if one of us was bringing our daughter by ourselves because the other one was sick or out of town, they would say, "Oh, where's your mom today? Where's your dad today?" And and that made a big difference, because we knew then that they didn't see us as a problem, that we could be there and worship together and support one another and pray for one another. And my daughter has such a big heart, and some of those folks that we sit near are elderly and have sometimes been in and out of the hospital. She has gotten to know them and prays for them when they're sick, and they pray for her. And I those relationships, there's nothing that can replace that. There's no kind of 5-step plan that can do the work that those kinds of interactions do. But I think part of that has been the way in which welcome and inclusion and understanding has been preached from the AMBO by our priests and deacons, has been practiced within our parish ministries, in multiple ways, not just when we refer to persons with disabilities, but people in other communities that are sometimes marginalized as well. This is a value at our parish, and it was a value of Jesus Christ and his ministry as well. But I think sometimes we can lose sight of that a little bit in our parish communities.
You've sort of hit on the question that's been brewing in my mind listening to you talk, Joseph, and that's what kind of educational program or parish formation happened to bring your parish to this point? Do you have any idea? Because that's the dream for all of us, is that
Yeah.
we can find parishes or help parishes become a parish that's really welcoming.
Well, when I said that I knew that it had happened, we weren't members of the parish at the time, but I know that one of the key people on a diocesan task force that we had for inclusion of persons with disabilities was also a key leader in ministry at that parish. So I think probably some of that began with some diocesan level training of parish leaders, and then parish leaders bringing some of those principles into their community and saying, hey, if we want to be a welcoming parish, here are some of the things that we need to do, and that might mean things like, for example, making the altar accessible to somebody who might use a wheelchair. For if I mean, some of those questions that I know that Charlene NCPD has prompted parishes to ask themselves as they take stock of how inclusive is our parish. Things like, if somebody who uses a wheelchair wanted to be a lector, could they do it, or would it be impossible at our parish? Right? You know, do we think about things like having sensory-friendly masses, at least on occasion, for people that might have sensitivities to? I mean, this is a lovely and wonderful time of year in this Easter season, that we have a lot of very tangible signs in our worship. But there are folks who might be challenged by sprinkling with holy water and incense and loud triumphant music and things like that. Are we not that we avoid all of that stuff altogether, but do we have some spaces, some, for example, at least one mass a month that's sensory friendly, for folks that might just feel more comfortable worshiping in a quieter environment with less of the sensory input. These kinds of things, I think, are important questions to ask. And I know that NCPD has some great resources for beginning to take inventory in the parish. I do think, though, that it begins with the parish leadership and with some of the conversations that they begin to facilitate in the community.
Thanks, Joseph. While you were talking, I just dropped in the chat. It's a resource we lovingly call the LAMB, LAMB, but it stands for Language Accessibility, Meaningful Participation, and Belonging. And we had one diocese that took this very simple resource, and it's available in English and Spanish on our website, and spent a year kind of unpacking it, and looking and talking about a lot of unconscious bias and assumptions and myths about people with disabilities, to where they ended up turning from that resource, creating a framework for the whole diocese on inclusion. So there are resources. I always say to people, we're much further ahead than we ever were, because what every parish always asks for, and clergy, is training and resources. So there is a lot available today, and more coming always than we had in the past. So again, speaking of the year of hope, I'm always hopeful. Someday we don't need us even having these conversations, because people are there, everybody equally. But right now, you're right. You have a parish that's further ahead, and those that are not as far ahead. And just even trying, we have a mentorship program going on right now at NCPD to try and get parishes or dioceses further ahead with some that are not, to just do mentoring again across the U.S. to kind of raise everybody up more.
Yes.
I'm curious. We all know that documents anticipated to come from the USCCB at some point, maybe this year in November, if it's done. And the 1978 document is a great document, but for the most part, it just seems to be put aside and nothing much really happened from it. What can we do in anticipation of that document, and with that document, once it comes out, to help it be an effective instrument for change in parishes? Do you have any suggestions?
Are you asking me or Charlene?
I was waiting.
Anyone who's bold enough to try to answer.
Go ahead, Joe.
In my experience, when a new document comes from our bishops, it really is up to very often lay leaders in ministry to take that up and really translate it for the community, to make it practical, to flesh it out. And there are good reasons for that. I'm not saying that, bishops' documents are not practical, but I think one thing that we sometimes don't think about is how different every parish and every region of our country is. We have a very diverse U.S. church. And so, now having had a peek behind the curtains and having had the opportunity to collaborate on some of those documents that are coming from the bishops, I know that sometimes the absence of very concrete practical recommendations is actually intentional, precisely because anything that they put in that document might not apply over here or over there or in this kind of community or that kind of community. And so so being able to kind of take what is there and say, now how do we operationalize this for our community, really depends on diocesan and parish leaders, and it depends in large part on lay people who are doing that practical on the ground ministry work in areas like catechesis and evangelization, parish social ministry, and other areas as well.
Right. Last year, I think it was, when we were just in the kind of survey stage of having all these listening sessions with lots of audiences towards the writing of the new pastoral statement, NCBD, in conjunction with the McGrath Institute for Church Life at Notre Dame, did a six-week series called In Communion, Advancing the Full Participation of Persons with Disabilities. And it was really breaking open what is a pastoral statement, what's in one, what's not in one, and then a whole lot of people speaking about various lenses of disability, and towards the goal of helping us really just start focusing on pastoral statements for this community and what that could look like, and dreams and visions. And then I know our intent, certainly once a new pastoral statement is issued, we will do a likewise seminar, probably equally in-depth, breaking open that new one. Because I think that's the first phase and stage, is an organization like NCPD or Word on Fire, we have to do that so that to help people put flesh on it. It's just a paper on a shelf otherwise. So we've got to kind of give the people the tools and the insights and the inspiration to again, like you say, own it, make it their own, because otherwise it won't move the church forward, which is the very big goal. We want something that will help direct us for the church of the 21st century.
Yeah. And the breaking open those documents is particularly important, because one of the things about pastoral statements, even coming from the Vatican or coming from the USCCB, there's a certain cadence to church documents, and it's important. There are a lot of sentences that, and I'm a writer, so I'm going to think in these terms, but there are a lot of sentences where a twofold point is being made. Twofold responsibilities, twofold gifts are very common in church documents, but it makes the sentence very complicated. Very often, too, maybe it's because of our Trinitarian faith, we have 3 points within one paragraph on something. So I think what sessions like what you're talking about, Charlene, do very well is they say, okay, let's pick apart this sentence and let's talk about these 3 things that the bishops mention here, and then what are the practical implications of each one of those things. That's a certain detail and level of concreteness that very often those pastoral statements are not going to get into for reasons that I've discussed before. But it is something that we do in our national organizations as well as in diocesan level leadership and parish level ministry as well.
Thank you. And I'm going to shift gears just for a minute, because as you were finishing that thought up, I thought, we've mentioned autism, the word autism, many times so far today, of course, and understandably. And again, with knowing the recent diagnosis from the CDC has just recently changed now to 1 in 31 from 1 in 36. So again, the diagnoses continues to rise. But I guess I wanted to also bring in a couple other areas, and this one touches me personally. I have a brother just a few years older than me that was diagnosed with frontal temporal dementia in recent years. So that's a whole nother area, and again, statistics on the rise of people with early onset Alzheimer's and dementia right now that we're experiencing, and I'm sure many of you are aware. His parish has offered a dementia support group, right? So not every parish has that. You know, you can look at so many different areas of disability or diagnosis, and some are further ahead than another. And even in that one, from what I remember, he's not currently attending that support group. But when he first started going, it was interesting that his feedback when he would come back would say, they're very nice people. But his frustration, from what we learned, the more we would listen and talk to him, was he wanted to go and talk with other people about what he was experiencing. They weren't doing that. They were almost like, it was almost like adult daycare kind of, or they were almost like providing at the same time, I think, respite for the rest of the family or others providing for him, which has a need and a place too. But so it was interesting to hear him say that.
Yeah.
So that's one area. And then I think of course, the other major diagnosis, unfortunately, on the rise is the mental health and mental illness. So that too, and of course, we work closely on that, our office, and in conjunction often with Deacon Ed Schoner at the Association for Catholic Mental Health Ministers, who, you know, out of his own loss of his daughter dying by suicide, he is certainly on a very much a lifelong mission to get a mental health ministry in every parish, you know, of all our Catholic churches. So all of these things, and I guess I just say that to say I've always felt the Catholic Church could advance greatly on these areas if they would provide more support groups. I mean, you go to other denominations and, you know, they're just busy in the evenings oftentimes with a plethora of support groups for everything under the sun. I think the more we move into doing more of that too, first we're giving people a safe and great place under their Catholic identity to come and meet others, what Catholic or non-Catholic. It's evangelization at its best as well, of course. So I think that's important to talk about.
I wonder, Charlene, if sometimes parishes shy away from offering more of that because they get overwhelmed by all of the different needs, you know, and I don't think any parish has to do everything.
Right.
I think what's pretty important initially is that the parish just kind of takes stock of the needs within the community, right? So if if you're at a parish that has a very large aging population, for example, support groups that are focused on later life issues, your brother is the exception, being a young person with dementia, but dementia very often associated with aging, and so a support group like that might be appropriate there. A parish with a lot of families with young children might benefit from autism support or something that we might see beginning earlier in life. But I think for every parish it's a little different. And I think one of the benefits of diocesan efforts to look at these needs within a particular diocese, and I know that you did some of this as well in your archdiocesan work in Galveston, Houston, is that you're able to kind of assess where within our diocesan boundaries are certain particular needs met, and how can I direct people based on the communities that they would benefit from plugging into, right? And so, you might have one kind of support group at this parish, and then 20 minutes away at this other parish, you have a different kind of support group. We can collaborate that way, and we don't always, have to do everything. But I can tell you that what was particularly striking to me when I was in diocesan ministry, and I'm sure that you heard scary stories like this too, was that when I was working with a family and counseling through the counseling office at the diocese, and for example, working with children who are diverse learners, and I know that they're very involved in the church as a family, and that's even why they decided to seek counseling through the diocese versus a different kind of community-based center. But I would see a fourth or fifth or sixth grader, and parents would mention at some point that they hadn't yet had their first communion, and I would think, oh well, but I know that you're very involved in the parish, and you've talked about going to mass every week. But tell me about that. And they might say something like, well, our child, when we called and tried to sign them up for religious education, they said that they didn't really have a particular place for him, or that kind of class, or some of the less sensitive phrases that people. I mean, I talked to one time where they called the parish and they literally said, our child is autistic, and we'd like to talk about preparing him for the sacraments. They said, we don't have anything for that, which I thought was it's a pretty egregious response to that call. That particular family, thankfully, was in a place where they knew to just kind of shore themselves up and move on to the next parish. But I can't help but think that there are countless families that just leave the church over being rejected in that way. And so I say all that to say, no one parish has to do everything, but we do need to make sure the needs of the community are met. And sometimes that takes collaboration between parishes too.
Absolutely. And whether it's in the deanery or vicariate, however a group of parishes are bundled, it's different in different dioceses, a core structure. But absolutely, you would hope that they would be collaborative in that, either in rotating some meetings around, or at least choosing different ones to have, at least in the regional area, for families to get to.
And there are different parishes that are better at doing different things because of the talent that they have at that parish. There's some parishes that are just amazing at providing religious education and catechesis for children who are diverse learners. There are other parishes that are great at providing gatherings for young adults with disabilities, and again, I know that you had some models that you worked with in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, where you would begin identifying those parishes and allowing certain parishes to serve as hubs of access for persons with disabilities. It's always important that we don't just kind of relegate that work to one particular parish here or there, and realize that it's everybody's responsibility to build an inclusive community. But in doing that, sometimes there are services that can be provided over here, and there are services that can be provided over there that complement one another, right?
Absolutely.
And there you had the benefit of Charlene to do that, right? Just as you're saying in your own Diocese of Austin, you had someone there who was coordinating these activities. And so it just seems to me that's the key. If no one's available to do it, it's just not going to happen. And how we can, how we can prepare people or encourage bishops to make it a priority. Everyone, the way the church is structured, I think no one can tell any bishop what to do in his diocese. So what's going to happen there is going to happen there. So whatever a document says from the conference, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be enacted someplace. It's just a matter of priorities, and it's a question of how we get the priorities to provide for the need.
Right.
However, very often I know that these pastoral statements and documents on disability are passed, if not unanimously, almost unanimously by the body of bishops. So in many ways, the bishops of our dioceses have signed their name to this and have kind of put it forward. But it may not always be in that leadership that we need might not always be in the form of a diocesan staff member who is assigned to that specific role. It might even be more appropriately through a core steering committee that includes multiple diocesan staff members, somebody from the catechetical office to talk about the catechetical related issues there, somebody from the worship office to talk about access and inclusion in worship. Or it may come from people who do those kinds of functions at different key parishes around town that want to share what their parishes are doing and help to replicate that across the diocese. So, I think it can happen in a number of ways, and really takes somebody to rise up in leadership, either from one of the parishes or from the diocesan offices, and say, hey, let's get together some folks to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I had the luxury of serving in a major archdiocese for so long. My first steering committee that was put together was nothing like the second one I put together, the second decade of time I spent there. The second one I always joked was like on steroids compared to the first one, because I had learned more and I had built more relationships with more people. So, I was able to invite all of the heads of all the diocesan offices to be on a steering committee, or send someone, if not themselves, and many of them stepped up themselves. So when you talk about getting the Catholic school office and the Office of Aging and the liturgy office, all of those people at the table with a person that's overseeing disability for a local church, and then as internal experts, and then you can start adding in the youth office, and then you start adding the external experts, someone from NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, someone who oversees disability secularly from the city's mayor's office, because they have those, Catholic Charities. The list goes on to where the people at the table got a lot done, and it was a very they had a lot of influence, areas of influence. So together collectively was helpful.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Sally has put in a great comment. I think you'd have a traveling team that goes around and trains people to do
Oh,
this.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That we had subcommittees of my steering committee. That there was one that was on training, just like she's saying. There was one that was on training. There was one that was on planning events. We had enough people at the table, interested parties, and with enough gifts and resources to do many things. So again, we can't do anything by ourselves, but we can do a lot more together, as we know.
Well,
So
and I think feelings of being overwhelmed, feelings of not knowing how to get started, or feeling not competent to do this kind of work are usually the reasons why this doesn't get done. I don't think it's usually an unwillingness on the part of communities to be more inclusive. I think it's really a lack of knowledge and experience. And so those people that do have the knowledge and experience, if they are willing to share that with others, I think that can make a big impact.
absolutely true.
Yeah, Charlene, maybe that's a good time to just mention again what you've put together at NCPD in your sort of a document repository or something that is trying to provide resources for.
Right, that's coming from NCPD now. The name of it is a Catholic Disability Exchange, so we're calling it CDX. We'll play on the end word, but so the CDX, Catholic Disability Exchange, will be on our website launching soon, where people are asking already for people across the nation if they already have created something that was useful, a useful tool, a resource model for being a more inclusive church regarding disability, to send that to us. Give us they have to put it, they have to enter it themselves and give, permission. Like, this is, when you use this, you need to give credit to, whether it's the Archdiocese of Washington or wherever. And then there'll be opportunities for people to go into that pot. If you're familiar with Teachers Pay Teachers, it's going to be kind of similar to that, but more for catechists or leadership to put things in and get things out. So there'll be more information coming on that, but we're about ready to launch that soon. So that, again, people don't have to keep recreating the wheel from parish to parish or diocese to diocese, which is a lot of what it's been in years past.
And how many dioceses do you have now as members of the NCPD?
I'd say for the CDX in particular, initially it will be anybody can put things in, but the only ones initially that will be able to get things out and for free will be our affiliate dioceses. So we're going to start with them. I'd say we have about a little over 80 dioceses in the U.S. that are affiliates of NCPD currently. So it will already be a pretty quick blessing to a lot of parishes and a lot of dioceses. And we are
So we've got to get that number up.
And we're
We've got
unfortunate
to
to say we
convince
do
more.
have to do that, but unfortunate to say that every year in the last 5 years, that number has continued to increase every year.
That's great.
Yeah,
So
that's great.
I think with
Really good.
offering more benefits and more resources and training, obviously makes it attractive to become a member of NCPD.
Great.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone has questions you've been holding back on or any comments you want to include in the chat, it's time to get them in. And I'm just looking through here to see if there's anything to discuss that we haven't already discussed? And love to see an inclusive mass at every parish. It seems this should be a priority given the number of disabled neurodivergent individuals in our communities.
Yeah, sensory
Yeah,
friendly masses are getting more popular across the nation. Finally, that's taken a while, but there's a movement now. And again, it doesn't change the liturgy. It just makes some, modifications and adaptations so that more people can worship more easily and successfully based on their lived realities. So, and then recently we piloted this last summer, anyway, recently, sensory-friendly Eucharistic adoration. So that was also well received. So we've got some training on that available now too.
Well, and
And
if folks are curious about what that looks like, I assume you have some guides and recommendations
we
on
do.
the website. There's a parish close to us. It's not the parish that we attend, but there's one that's close to us that has a monthly sensory friendly mass, and I want to distinguish that concept from the concept of styles of worship. There are folks that like more contemporary, praise and worship music and things like that. There are folks that like more solemn music. This is not a style issue. It has to do with things like the volume and some of the sensory elements of the Mass. So that monthly sensory friendly Mass at the parish near us has lower lighting. It's quieter. They there's actually an older priest that comes and says that Mass. It has kind of a quiet voice, very calming, quiet voice. They don't use incense in that sensory friendly Mass, and there are a few elements like that, but it doesn't really change. Other than those kinds of changes, doesn't really change the style of worship so much as just those sensory elements within the worship.
Even, we really recommend if the priest will accommodate us to tighten the homily to make it shorter so that maybe the Mass is not a full hour because that might be a really long time for some people to attend to. So just that might be shorter as well. And again, that there are some other things that you would have in the narthex available at a Mass like this. Not everyone needs large print missals, but maybe there's a small collection of large print missals for that Mass for those who would like to have that as a tool or resource. We would certainly be concerned about hearing, whether people need any assisted listening devices. So, and then maybe, again, I always say don't, forget the original fidget, the rosary. Have baskets of rosaries available. So if someone just wants to use the rosary as it's a fidget, especially
I like that.
use your resources wisely, and that's key for us.
They also had flip books that were like social stories for people that autistic people that might be attending as well.
Mm-hmm. And we have online courses on our website under our course tab, and there's 2 for sensory friendly masses, but the more recent one, which says advanced, is excellent, and I would recommend people check that one out. And also there's also our online courses we have on parish advocates and growing parish advocates, because I think that's another thing. As much as we need and want parents to, key resources, help us get to know their loved one, even the church documents say we want to get the parents out of the equation as soon as possible. It might take time for relationships to be built, especially for someone with any delays. So if they can be with us until some relationships start being built, but then if we can let them back up because they do respite often and often to take them out of that equation, that's helpful. And parish advocates can step up and in some of these roles and grow that ministry for us too.
Yeah, and the sensory friendly masses don't have to be billed as, should not be, in my opinion, billed as separate masses. You can have a sensory friendly mass as a regular part of the mass schedule, right? It's just it's a low sensory mass.
Low sensory.
You just
Absolutely.
said, bring the Christy, you put a hand up, but we can't let, you can put a question in the chat, but we can't acknowledge it. You can't speak in any sort of way. I see that you've raised your hand, Christy. So Chrissy, if you have, we're almost out of time here and I have to cut off to go to the next one. But if you have a question you want to pop in the chat real quickly, we can accommodate it there. Or you can bring it into the next hour.
First parish sensory friendly mass that I helped with in Houston, and at the planning recap later with the parish committee, They were literally in tears because they said they had a family that's been worshiping at their parish at the 5 o'clock vigil mass for decades. That night for the sensory friendly mass, they came in with an adult son in a wheelchair that they had never met before. I mean, they were extremely surprised and moved by the door that opened for that family and for their community.
Eric Carter tracks statistics. Eric Carter's he heads the disability ministry program. I can never remember what it's called at Baylor University, and tracks a lot of statistics on church attendance and accommodation, various things. I was talking with him a while back, and he previously had said his statistic was 1/3 of families leave their parish or religious community because they don't feel welcome in the parish. The new statistic is half.
Mm.
So his new statistic from the research that's going on right now in Texas, primarily where he is now around Waco, is half. So that really has increased quite a bit. Chrissy, you're asking if there's a tool available for surveying the parish needs. Charlene put up earlier in the chat her inclusive participation assessment tool that you can find at the NCPD website. So we're going to have to sign off here to go to the next session, but it's called the LAM assessment tool, and you could go to ncpd.org and find that.
Thanks. And Chrissy, quickly, we did a national survey through CARA last year. The results of that on a national survey about where parishes stand, which might give you a little glimpse into your own, is also found on our website. If you just probably search CARA survey, CARA.
Great. Okay, well, we're going to have to sign off so we can start the next hour. But Joseph, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks,
It's a
Joseph.
Thank
pleasure to
you.
meet
Great
you
to
here
be
online.
with you.
Yeah,
God bless you.
really appreciate your comments, and God bless you and your family and your daughter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great. All right. So join us in the next hour. We have Maureen Pratt back with us. Maureen, for those of you who were with us yesterday, was with us. She's going to be talking about the needs of people with disabilities, and especially talking a lot about caregivers, which is a big topic that's come up in our conversation online. So look forward to seeing you all in about 2 minutes. You have to close out of this one and then sign on to the next link. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you soon. God bless everyone. Bye. Bye, Joseph. Thank you again.
Bye.